Hello there. This is January the 10th, 2023. I have a question that fits into the category of tithing. This is from Doreen in Texas. She just recently listened to the recordings in the Living God Ministries radio archive on tithing. This is a number of programs. The first one is kind of the shock and awe. So once you get to the second one is when I really start getting into the topic. But of course, I can't cover everything that's in those radio programs. And so this is an opportunity for people to ask me questions directly and personally about some things that they may have heard in the radio programs that I recorded, and something else has come up. There's another scripture passage that I just simply didn't address. And so this is a good opportunity to kind of fill in the gaps and, just try to bring some more light into the different subjects that I've been able to present. All right, so here I've got the subject of the widow's mite. Okay, so she's listened to the programs on tithing, and this is about Mark chapter 12, verses 41 to 44, where it says, "Now Jesus sat opposite the treasury and saw how the people put money into the treasury, and many who were rich put in much. Then one poor widow came and threw in 2 mites, which make a quadrans. So he called his disciples to himself and said to them, 'Assuredly, I say to you, that this poor widow has put in more than all those who have given to the treasury, for they all put in out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty. But in all that she had put in all that she had, her whole livelihood.'" All right, so she put in 2 mites, and what this was about it was about the idea of tithing, and tithing was given in the law. It was something that people were required to do to live in obedience to the law of God, and the tithe was given to the Levites so that the Levites could perform the functions that they performed on behalf of all the people. And their function was, for the most part, it was what you would expect of any governmental structure. They were there in order to resolve conflicts, for the most part. They also performed services through the temple. They did that, and so they did do a lot for the people. And so for them to be available to the people, to be able to provide these services, not just in the temple from a religious point of view, but also in order to resolve the problems of life, and there's health and welfare issues with regards to whether there was too much mold or mildew in your house, things like that, and to inspect people in the event that they had a skin disease. These are things that they did for the people, and in order to be available to do these things, they would need to be funded in order to do that work. Otherwise, they're going to have to go do something else in order to feed themselves and provide themselves with the things that they needed in order to sustain their lives and in order to support their households. So the tithe was given in a way that you would think of as a tax. It was the tax for the government in the nation of Israel. That's pretty much what it was. It was not about giving to the church or giving to the perpetuation of the gospel or given in order to promote the God of Israel. It wasn't for that at all. That's not what it was about in the sense that we would understand it today in the context of the gospel. All right. Now it just so happens that I've got a widow's mite over here, and I thought I'd pull it out just to give you kind of a visual illustration of what this would look like. I have one full one, and then I've got one here that's been broken. It looks like, looking at the edges and stuff, and of course you can't see with the camera, but if you could kind of visualize a little bit the height of my fingers, and this gives you a little bit of a perspective. This one is broken off. A piece has been broken off, and this one is a full piece. And they're made out of copper or bronze. It's not an expensive kind of a metal. I got these for $5. But to give you a little bit of perspective, this is a penny. This is one of our current pennies. And this is the widow's mite, or the mite that was used. Very small coin, very, very small piece of metal. But still, it's very usable for a lot of things. You can use it in order to make a tool, or a lot of them can be used in order to construct a weapon. They can be used for all kinds of parts and have a lot of utility. And so these would not necessarily just remain of this size or remain in this form. It would be melted down and used for making other things that people would use. Now, in your life right now, you're surrounded by all kinds of things. And if you look around, you'll find that some things are made out of metal, fittings and fixtures and tools and stuff. And metal is just simply more suitable to use for those kinds of purposes than other materials. So that's why they're used for that. And back in the day, metal was used for fittings and parts and tools and all kinds of things, and in similar ways that the metal is used today. So these would be collected, and then they would be melted down and formed into something else. And the smaller quantity allows for more precision to be able to make something. Whether you're going to use 3 of them or 12 of them or 13 of them, you can get a little bit more precision. It also allows for the distribution of the metal from the mines or from the mints, distribution in smaller pieces so that they eventually become used as money, in that sense that people can trade back and forth with each other. And what would you be able to get with something like this? I looked around, and if I remember correctly, I better check. I think it was 5 of these could get you a sparrow. Give me just a moment. I've got different windows open. Yeah, here it is. About 3 or 4. 3 or 4 of these could get you a sparrow. And sparrows were useful. They were, they were important. 3 or 4 of these could get you one of those, and you got feathers, and get enough feathers, you could make a pillow or something else. Feathers are very useful for a lot of things. The sparrow itself, hey, you could make sparrow noodle soup. It's not quite the same as chicken noodle soup, but you could make sparrow noodle soup and do very well with just 3 or 4 of these. You could be eating just fine. Now I've got a penny here, and so you could say that the penny and 3 or 4 of these, you may be able to get maybe 2 sparrows out of a penny, just to give you an idea of what that would be worth. And of course today, in the way that the currency system that we have is right now, I don't think you can get much of anything for a penny anymore. But someday, if it's solid copper, you might be able to get something later on when the currency system gets reorganized. But historically speaking, the copper penny, or the amount of this, did have some substantial value. 3 or 4 of these used to be able to get you a loaf of bread. 3 or 4 of these could get you a loaf of bread. So that can give you some kind of perspective of if 3 or 4 pennies versus the widow's mite. 3 or 4 pennies could get you a loaf of bread back then in the time of Jesus as well. And this widow's mite could get you a loaf of bread if you've got enough of them to get 3 or 4, relatively speaking. So that gives you a little bit more of a perspective in terms of what its value is in trade. And I think that's a really big deal. Now, of course, today 3 or 4 pennies isn't going to get you a loaf of bread. If you were to do the measurements, you might find that the loaf of bread costs about twice as much as it did back then if you were to do all of the adjustments for the changes in the monetary system. I think that's probably due to the packaging. You got to buy the plastic bag that the bread is found in. That's probably where the cost is going. But like I said, eventually things will get reorganized, and we will probably go back to a system that will value things just as they always have been valued throughout history. All right, and so that's the widow's mite. what it was for, how it was valued. But when Jesus spoke about the widow's mite, okay, there's two things that I think are important to recognize here that are presented in Mark chapter 12, verse 41 to 44. The first thing is that Jesus had to call his disciples. This was at the end of his ministry. And he was just sitting there, apparently, by himself, just watching people put money in the treasury, and learning from that, looking for something that he might discover that could be interesting from just simply observing people giving to the temple treasury. But he was kind of alone, he was sitting there by himself. His disciples were off doing something, and he had to call them over. Hey, come on over here. I got something to tell you now. I got something to show you. And then they'd have to go over there to see him. What was going on, in my opinion, was that he was not fulfilling the messianic king role that the people were expecting, and they just weren't sure what to do with him. He wasn't following through with what they had expected, and so that's one important thing. But the other thing is what he was saying about the widow's mite. What he was saying was he was giving a comparison between the lady and others who were giving. He was making a comparison. And the comparison was about righteousness. That's from what I can tell, that's what it was about. It was about righteousness and about the quality of what you give. The people who were giving a lot, well, they had a lot. And what they were giving was not necessarily as valuable to them as what was valuable to the widow, in this case, to the lady. And so percentage-wise, if you look at what the people were able to earn and what they were giving, compared with what the lady was able to earn and what she was giving, percentage-wise, she was giving much more of herself than the others were giving of themselves. She was giving much more. And so while the people might make a comparison and say, well, you sure do give a lot. You give a lot. I guess you're more righteous with God, or you're a more holy person or something like that. But look at this person, they don't give very much, but percentage-wise, they give a whole lot more of what they were able to obtain than you. And so you shouldn't be looking down on her, comparatively speaking. Instead, she should be elevated in that sense, because she's giving more of what she has in comparison with what these other people are giving in terms of what she could really produce by labor. And it's common for people, to make judgments on others in accordance with what do they really give. Who are the big givers versus the little givers, as an example. A lot of churches, they do look at their people in that context, in the context of how much that they give. And it could be easy to fall into that kind of trap, in a sense, of passing judgment on people. But it's better if you just don't think of it that way and you don't look at that. The way that I've always managed the ministry work that I do is that I constructed Living God Ministries as an opportunity for people to give in order to promote the gospel through radio broadcasting. And so if they give a lot, then a lot of people can be reached. And if they don't give very much, then not very many people are going to be reached. But whatever people want to give, I keep my focus where it should be, which is not in accordance with, well, how much am I going to earn? But I don't earn that way. The way that I get compensated for the work that I do is determined by the board of directors, and it's not excessive. It just isn't. And but it's fair, it's reasonable, and allows me to sustain life and accomplish the things that I need to accomplish, with some exceptions. And so I have to do work elsewhere sometimes. But that's not related to what people give. That's related to the volume of work that I do. That's how I organized what I do in order to make sure that I'm not affected or persuaded by what people give or don't give, and I won't have such of an opportunity to pass judgment on people like other people will tend to do. in a similar position as myself. And I've enjoyed that, and over many years, I found that it works. It just does. If a person gives $10 versus $1,000, I've noticed, it just doesn't really affect me. And I think that's really important. And so that's what I've done. But for others, they can't say that. So it's a comparison of righteousness is what Jesus is doing. And that just simply does not apply today. If it does, it's being applied inappropriately. First of all, this was a tithe to the Levitical priesthood. And we don't have the Levitical priesthood today. We just don't. The reason why people give to the ministry is totally different for the reasons for which the Israelites would give to the Levitical priesthood. And so you just cannot make an appropriate comparison between the two because they are totally unrelated. The other thing that you need to be cautious about in general is the opportunity for religious pride. Because here Jesus is making a comparison on the basis of righteousness, and you could be thinking, well, gosh, I give a lot of what I have, and so I can now esteem a greater sense of pride, a greater sense of religious pride, because of course I am more righteous and holy than these other people. While they might give a lot, they don't give as much as I do in terms of percentage. And that's not good. It's just simply not good, because what you end up doing is you end up trying to establish your right standing with God by what you do or what you don't do, by the system of works. And your relationship with God is somehow defined or qualified by what you give. And that is not what the gospel tells us. That is not what the new covenant is about. It's totally unrelated to that. Our right standing with our God and our relationship with God is based on what He has given to us, not what we give to Him, but based on what He has given to us and what we do with what He has given. But for the most part, that has to do with the truth. It's not measured in currency, or in money. It's not to be measured that way. So we have a new covenant that's in effect that takes away these opportunities for religious pride, if we will adhere to the gospel and to the new covenant as He defined. Whereas in this case, as Jesus is still in the old covenant and He is teaching the old covenant, He will use this, and He used this in order to make a comparison with the people and in order to show them that they are not as right with God as they may think they are. All right? And so it's another way of showing them that they need to obtain their righteousness through some other means. Because through obedience to the law, to include the law of tithing, it just isn't going to happen. It's never going to happen that way. All right? So I hope that this is helpful with regards to the widow's mite and Mark chapter 12. And if you have any other questions for me, do send them to me directly by email to aaron@aaronbudgeon.net. Thanks.